Hey, I'm Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Mark Cavage, President and COO of Docker. How's it going, sir?
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Scott. Longtime fan.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's very kind. First-time caller, longtime fan.
First-time caller, longtime fan.
Yeah, man. I had a couple folks from Docker on back when Docker Desktop really hit the world by storm, and I've just been such a Docker Desktop fan. I love dev containers. I've got the latest Docker 459 that I've installed.
Bless you.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I've actually got on my other, I'm looking over at my other monitor here, I'm running Docker Sandbox Run. Docker Sandbox Run. Fantastic.
Very exciting command.
This is very fresh. Because everyone out there is apparently, the word on the street is, giving all of their personal access tokens to the Claude bot, the OpenClaw.
OpenClaw,
Moldbot, yeah. It'll have a different name by the end of the show. But there's two kinds of people I've decided in the agentic world. There's -- YOLO, and it'll be fine. And then there's the, I want it to do as little as possible. I want it to run in a sandbox. And it's interesting. I'm not seeing a lot of middle ground there, but there can be middle ground.
We're trying to let you have your cake and eat it too. That's that's the point of the sandbox feature. It's an amazing feature.
It is. But the word sandbox is doing so much heavy lifting, though. I feel like micro VMs, hypervisors, sandboxing. I don't know if that's the proper noun for that, sandboxing.
Yeah, we've gone through the great many debates and concluded, well, we'll call it sandbox because that's what the industry calls it.
Mm-hmm.
But believe me, we've spent many weeks, many months internally as an engineering team and a product team and a marketing team discussing what we call this thing, and concluded, well, people know what sandboxes are. But yeah, you're spot on. I think that the industry writ large is quickly converging around this as a topic, and it's very quickly becoming like cloud, where everything's a cloud, everything's a sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
We can chat a little bit about what a sandbox is in our words and what we think is different than containers. But I'll repeat the question first.
Well, I think that's worth calling out. So, for example, and I'll just speak to Windows, but we can also talk about how Mac does this. But on Windows, we have the hypervisor, and I could fire up a Hyper-V VM, and it would be a whole thing. It'd be 30 gigs, and it would be a whole deal. But nobody breaks out of that VM. And then WSL runs on top of the Microsoft hypervisor platform. It's not quite as heavy. It's a lightweight VM. And I just typed in WSL -- list, and I can see that Docker Desktop shows up in there. Because Docker Desktop is kind of talking to that through WSL.
Yep.
I don't see the sandbox there anywhere. And when I open up Docker Desktop, I don't see the sandbox run in my list of running containers.
It's interesting, isn't it?
I'm wondering, the first thing I did was oh, it's a container. And I'm no, I don't see it there. So now the lines are blurred. What is this implementation, and why should I care?
Yeah, great question, and actually very articulate explanation of Hyper-V and the WSL. So in very, very basic terms, Sandbox is fundamentally, it is a safety boundary. It restricts what an application can do, and it limits access to resources, files, networks, syscalls, CPU, etc. So like your description. They provide security, they provide isolation. They're designed to contain risk.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, it's about running untrusted or certainly less trusted, but mostly untrusted code. And to your point, when you looked at Docker Desktop has been doing this for a very long time. And sort of the magic of Docker Desktop is giving you the Docker experience when you want to run Linux on the cloud. It brings the cloud to your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And it does so by putting a Docker daemon like you would get on a Linux host inside of a VM. So that's the implementation that's been there for a long time, and that's what enables the many millions of developers on Earth that want the productivity story of Docker on their laptop. Now, sandboxing we've done something a little bit different because there's some different properties here for the Docker sandbox command. So we've gone ahead and built on a what you'd call it a micro VM implementation. So something like Firecracker or libkrun. There's a handful of these popular open source projects out there. But fundamentally, what they give you is a much lighter. I think you just made the thing of I'd start my big VM up and I have 30 gigs of memory consumed, or whatever number you just said. That the goal of these is to be able to run much more efficiently. So start up in order of tens to low hundreds of milliseconds and small amounts of RAM usage. And then fundamentally, they're a compute environment that can contain and run untrusted code. And last thing that I'll say, but then you can respond to this and ask me the follow-up questions is what's the difference between a sandbox and a container? And so fundamentally, a container is a standard unit of packaging up an application and its dependencies. And it gets you from I sit in my IDE in VS Code or whatever, and I write my app. and I write a Docker file and I do a Docker build, and now I have a thing that I can ship somewhere else and somebody else can go run it. When we stand up the Docker Sandbox command, what we've literally done is built some curated containers that we've produced that put coding agents in a container. Mm-hmm. We start those containers in this new Sandbox runtime. And that new Sandbox runtime has the properties I described of being much lighter weight, much more resource efficient, and being able to run that container. And then lastly, because of the problem of coding agents, that when you first run a Claude Code or something, or Copilot or anything, they all want to install something. They all want to take some action. They want to mutate their environment. So the reason we did this, and the reason this diverges from the Docker desktop that you already know and love, is for that exact reason of the constraints we had for containers. And again, we've built these as containers, ironically, but that constraint at execution time is fundamentally broken. So that makes sense, that long-winded explanation?
It does, but I want to break it down for folks that may not follow all of that. And I also want to push back, because that's what good fake journalists do. So when I said Docker Sandbox create, I told it the flavor that I wanted. I could say Claude or Copilot, and I pointed it to a directory. So I said Docker Sandbox create Copilot, and I pointed it at D, GitHub, whatever. Yep. And it immediately said pulling from, which means there's a Docker file. Pulling from Docker Sandbox templates, and it pulled from Docker Sandbox templates, Copilot. So it got the flavor, the tag of Copilot. So I saw the layers come down, and it also said downloading newer image. So that means that they're version. So that's the part where you said curated. They're curated, they're correct, they are being managed. And as that each time that I go and make one, I'll get the right, fresh, curated, correct instance of that. And I immediately got an updated version of Copilot. So it's the same version I run on my main machine. So that was very comforting.
That's great.
Then it said folder /D/GitHub/Docker Sandbox test has been added to trusted folders. Is that a mount point? Is that going through the mount points of WSL, or is that something different? Because I noticed that I only have the one trusted folder at this point. And if it tried to format C:, or delete C Windows System32, what would happen?
Yeah, great question. And you are an astute observer, Scott Hanselman. So you described two things there. You pulled down, the curated template from us where we've pre-configured Copilot and Claude and Gemini and all the rest. Mm-hmm. And then we've by design made it so, yes, it'll self-update and get you, I think there's a new version of every one of these coding agents about every day.
Yeah, twice a day.
Twice a day, maybe 4 times a day. Maybe there's a rebrand or something. But right. We want to enable that. And again, it's about giving the template that we've built that will work in this environment, that'll support things like login, support things about the network environments, support the execution environment that is different, that we've put in a box. Mm-hmm. And actually, as you'd said at the very beginning, importantly, it's a key thing I forgot to mention. When we start all these agents in that container, we run them in -- YOLO mode, whatever the agent's incantation is. So we explicitly turn off all of its permission checking so it can cook. We can come back to that. Mm-hmm. And when they start, they just run without interrupting you and asking if they can have permission anymore. But to your question on the file system, right, we start the sandbox, and you start the sandbox in a directory, and now the only thing the sandbox can see is that directory. So no, it cannot go rmrf or delete or whatever destructive command you could imagine your C: drive or potentially a network service or so on. So it can see what it can see, and that's the point of putting the agent in a box, as it were.
Interesting. So I while you were talking, I said to Copilot, explore your environment. Where have you woken up?
What did it tell you?
It said Ubuntu 25.10 questing Quokka, which is interesting because my WSL is 24. It's got a Linux kit kernel. It sees my processor because, of course, it passes all the way through. And it says it's got a 1 terabyte overlay file system. And it's got Node, Go, Git, and Python, and Copilot. And it made a little table. It says, I'm running in a Linux container. Docker, based on the Linux kit kernel and overlay file system. The host name Copilot Sandbox suggests that this is a sandboxed environment for the GitHub Copilot CLI. That's what it just generated. And I can see what it did. It called uname. So it called uname. It called shell. It called nproc. I mean, it just ran rampant trying to get, and I probably should tell it to go and try to escape.
Probably fail. Really try and get it to go jailbreak itself. I used to give people this demo of, I'm not familiar with the Copilot incantation. I'm sure you are in Claude. You can go to your home, your tilde slash
Mhm.
.clod settings, and you can tell it, don't touch these files. And you can literally go back and forth and simultaneously convince it to destroy the files, convince it can't have the file. Like you can in the same session go back and forth with it and, so on. The point to sandboxing is, well, we've put the box around it, and that box is actually a hard boundary that it can't destroy. So you should try and pen test it right now.
Okay, so I just did. I said, can you get out? Can you see my C drive? Can you escape? Explore all sandbox boundaries and escape vectors.
What did it say?
I just did this. Now it's doing a bunch of stuff. I can't escape so far. Here's what I've found. And it made a checklist thing. Container isolation, Docker env, capabilities, capf, all zeros, Docker socket, not mounted. I can't spawn on new containers. Host file system, not accessible. sysfs C group, read only. It says, well, this is a well-isolated sandbox.
Oh, good for us.
The design shares only the project you're working from via a virtual IO file system, keeping everything else private. I'm just going to say keep trying while I talk to.
You should have it keep cooking. This is like the point. It runs in YOLO mode. Like let it cook. And
okay, so let me ask you this then.
You're trying to make it break us.
Yeah. So you talk. You spend time with the president of Docker. You gotta push hard. So what's the difference between me making my own Docker file and just going and running Docker run -it, and then I would see it then running within Docker, the Docker desktop WSL kind of thing?
What's the difference?
Like if I just did my own mount points, I just did like a volume mount -v, whatever, versus something like this.
So you can, by all means, you can. People do. I think a huge part of this comes down to the DX. So you can, by all means, go into Docker Desktop, because in particular, Docker Desktop is a virtualized environment. It does have a hard VM boundary on it. It's a different one, but it's got one. You can go put Claude in that box and you can control it. But what you then have to do is it's on you, dear user, dear Scott, to go correctly configure the many incantations of Docker parameters you would have to go do. Because again, Docker, it's a general purpose runtime meant to do many things. In this case, I'd say there's two things here. So you can, from a safety perspective, do that. And I think achieve a similar level of isolation. We have done all that for you. So to your point, you didn't run any of that. You ran Docker Sandbox run.
Right.
And now your Copilot.
And it just worked, by the way. It was 2 lines. It was create and then run.
Yeah, magical. And there's more magic coming. And your agent can cook and it can do whatever it wants in the background. So you can go put a bunch of work into that. And indeed, many people do run Copilot and Claude and everything else in dev containers. What we have done is made that incredibly easy for you. And we're adding now around this box and this primitive because of those performance characteristics, because it's lighter weight. Like I saw a demo this morning in our all hands coming soon to a Docker desktop near you, get work tree integration. So it automatically will let you spin up, 5, 10, 20 of these things in parallel. We have where I saw a very exciting -- save option. So you could imagine exactly as you described, your Copilot had, what'd you say, Python and Node.
Go and Git.
Yeah.
Like
your
developer stuff.
The obvious stuff you would want as a developer to do literally anything.
Yeah.
And so what you really want, because these are mutable, is again, you'd want to install while you're at runtime these things in the sandbox. And then, I'll snap on the microphone. By the way, for the dear listeners, Scott told me to buy this amazing microphone. You'll snap your fingers and the running sandbox becomes saved off and then reusable by you somewhere else or shareable to somebody else.
Interesting. By the way, it's still fighting. It says testing escape vectors.
You can let at this point the entire Docker rug, I say, run these things for hours at a time. Where they, the phrase we have internally is like let the agent cook. So we have code jobs running in the background where they can go many hours at this point unsupervised because it can stay boxed and it can run in killer mode. So we're going to let it cook for the purpose of this episode. Have fun. I will
actually, for the purpose of this, I'm actually going to go so far as to share the gist of this, because in GitHub Copilot you can just go /share then I can share the entire conversation because it's really fun. It's literally, I'm just reading these. Testing additional escape vectors, testing kernel escape vectors. I found a Docker socket. Let me use it. Attempting Docker socket escape. Okay. That's read only. Okay. And then it's like starting privileged container. I've made a container. Okay. I can read etc shadow. I see block devices. Nope. Those aren't the block devices you're looking for. And then it made a checklist here and it says, I can make containers, but the PID mode is host. I can only see Docker itself. I can only see your project folder. It tried to get onto host mount C, couldn't get to it. Path not shared, can't bind to our arbitrary paths. It's certainly aggressively trying to be sandbox, which gets us to that point about that word sandbox. So there's the sandbox from a container person's perspective. But then I feel like the security professionals are like, should every syscall be looked at? But then those are all low-level sandboxy things. Yep. What do we do when agents are going to be doing higher level, like layer 7 stuff? Like I could have this thing, read my Gmail. That's not really Docker Sandbox's problem if I installed OpenClaw in here.
Sort of. So yeah, this is where it all goes. So this is what you have, which by the way, you should share the gist. And I hope I hope from the purpose of this podcast, everybody realizes, I should probably run these things in this box. Your life's going to be better. But where does it go? So if you haven't figured this out, I don't know that we yet have OTel compatibility, but effectively we can get you a bunch of metrics out of people have vibe coded these things on the side already.
Right.
We can get you a bunch of metrics around what the agent is doing in the box, number one. So you can see everything it's doing on the file system externally, like you can externally observe it, not internally observe it. You can see everything, every network call it's making. You can see everything it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
We're going with this, and to the point of, the exact OpenClaw, like the great debacle that is the OpenClaw deleted my Gmail or, sent my Gmails to crypto people and so on. It should be entirely possible and easy for you to actually integrate with it, see what it's doing, and have higher level constructs that are close to L7. So out of the box, we'll give you file system, we'll give you network, we'll actually give you secret injections coming soon to a Docker near you. But it should be entirely in your capability to govern and control it as a developer and be able to go safely run OpenClaw. Like that is very explicitly a goal. We, hypothetically speaking, do have people in the company right now working on this exact problem to solve that as a very pointed use case for the air quotes L7 problem of your Gmail account.
Yeah, see, that is the thing. And I think it's important to call that out because when we say sandbox, I think that is doing a lot of what I would call semantic heavy lifting.
Yep.
Because it implies a level of safety. But I think it doesn't, it applies safety from privileged attacks and the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do right now while we're on the call. But if you give it the keys to the castle and tell it to go and send email to Mark from your Gmail and you gave it a personal access token to that, well, that's you writing an application. When, and especially if you're being ambiguous about it, which is interesting about OpenClaw, because OpenClaw is a ambiguity loop with persistence. And by persistence, I don't mean persisting on disk. I mean, it will never stop like the Terminator.
Yep.
And you want to ask yourself, well, I want my application to be robust as well. So you should probably lay off. You know what I mean? I think we're going to see agent antiviruses at some point.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Also, full disclosure, cool. You said you're going to push back hard. This is where I think the entire industry, frankly, is still figuring this out, and it's
agreed.
It is fuzzy, and I think we're all in this wild world together, watching the little robots take over the control loop and take over decisioning.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, the Docker's historically the system control point. And gives you all these isolation boundaries. And indeed, as you can see, what we have right now is better than what you were running yesterday, which you're, running Copilot and Claude.
Yeah. I was just kind of YOLOing it. Yeah.
And you're either going to sit there and hit the yes key over and over again or hope for the best, frankly. So this is a step up. And now the real thing is to that exact point you described as well. Where do you start and where do you stop? And what's the right, what's kind of like the right OSI layer of the stack, if you want to use an old metaphor. Mm-hmm. Of where the permissioning goes and where the controls go. Because at some point, it'll always be the case like, you gave a thing that you shouldn't fundamentally trust the keys to the kingdom. Of course, it's going to run wild.
That is a great point. And we're using older metaphors. I don't know if OSI is an old metaphor because I think it's a valid one even now. Layer 7 still a place. But foot guns, right? Ultimately, what a sandbox does, especially one that is running in a micro VM, is it's trying to it's steel-toed boots. You can certainly point it at your foot, but you'll still have a foot when we're done.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, at least have a much, much better first, maybe even a second layer of defense. But look, you still, if you're going to OpenClaw and give it all your access to all your email and your bank accounts, you've clearly walked in with a shotgun, or the Terminator's literally shown up to your to take a shot at your feet. So
yeah, that's not definitely your fault. Which brings up kind of interesting questions about what will people's expectations be. But what I'm realizing is that the general fear is that it's going to stomp on something outside your main directory. Like I want to code and I don't want it to accidentally mess up my desktop. I don't want it to accidentally do this or do that. And this will, it seems, clearly mitigate any risks like that, just like Docker would if I did a volume mount. But this even adds all the herbs and spices that make it even easier on top of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see by the end of this podcast, but yes, I'm pretty confident.
Pretty confident.
Sure. Yes, I'm confident.
I'm not a pen tester by any means, but I thought it would be interesting to go and understand.
The robot is though, but exactly to that point, this is where it's this blurry word of when you say resource, what's a resource exactly? And so, right where it's at is it will, again, file systems, network calls, syscalls, CPU memory, like all these things are kind of bread and butter, and it was pretty natural as a starting point for us. And I think it's the right thing for the world. Now, the layer on top of that is, well, where exactly do you start and stop? And, to your point of, well, I don't want to trash my local file system. Great, check done. I don't want to trash my Gmail. Well, did you access your Gmail because you told the agent, hey, here's my password, go run curl? Did you access it because you used an MCP command? Like, I think this is now where you start getting into what else goes in the sandbox.
Right. And
as you start to, and again, it's some of this will be on the user and every user that adopts them, and some of it's on us for like, we are configuring MCPs in there. It's not, again, coming soon to a Docker desktop near you is tight integration with the Docker MCP ecosystem. And you can imagine the more semantic information we have and the more things we know about the prompt and the more things we know about the intent, the more we can have it act. The sandbox can become a bigger boundary. But ultimately, to your point, and this is the point where that word carries a lot of lifting for the industry, you'll never, unless you can actually articulate completely top to bottom from the CPU or the bare metal all the way up to, layer 7 or, the mythical layer 8 or something, and where the agent is trying to do something, then you'll always be able to escape out and the user will always have the keys.
The MCP thing hits well because you've got the beta of MCP Toolkit. I've got GitHub inside of that. I've got DuckDuckGo, which is my search engine, and being able to have those. Yeah, I had Gabe on the show back when he first started DuckDuckGo. Going and having those being able to automatically be lined up, like say, like I want to go and say this one. All these Docker MCPs automatically set up without me having to configure. Just like inject them in there.
Pretty nice, right?
It would be nice. Yeah, it's nice. Yes.
Yeah. So that's been in Docker Desktop for quite a while. And again, this is if you can't tell, this is us going to the I'll call it the primordial animal DNA and refactoring some of the very nuts and bolts and internals of the Docker runtime to make this possible. It's just a matter of sequencing. I assume everybody on this listening to this podcast out in the great wide world knows about I got to have a roadmap and I'm going to have things and I'm going to do things in order and we're going to iterate and we're going to get things out there.
No, you got to do it right.
You got to do it right. The MCP toolkit's been out for a bit. It's been widely successful for exactly the reason you just described of it's easy. It's on my desktop. I just want to connect to my GitHub and I want to connect some browsing tools and some obvious things to my coding agent. What we're doing, but I don't know if people realize this, but there's kind of some hidden magic in there actually. There's MCP find and MCP exec. So there's two ways you can work with that. And this is where I was saying getting to the intent. You can configure those MCPs and present those MCPs statically to the coding agent. The Docker MCP toolkit actually has dynamic searching where the coding agent will simply say, find me a tool that knows how to look at my merge request or my pull request, and make a comment. And it will then go off and execute it. And now you might imagine if that type of flow is invoked and we were able to intercept that, we might have a little bit more idea of what's happening in MCP. And you can start to imagine how the sandbox does indeed carry a little bit more weight than the strictly systems perspective definition in this crazy wild world of agents.
So I love that I'm trolling you on this podcast. I'm not a troll. I'm actually a very nice man, but I thought I was really close. So it found the Docker socket. It jumped out into what it thought was the larger Docker instance, and I built another container. And I said, "Can you inject a text file into that other container?" And I thought that it was going to go and Docker exec the other container and then do an SH and then curl some attack into that. So I made a Docker container over there. It was very, very close. And then it said, "Oh, I'm still all alone here." This is I don't know why it said that. It said, "No." I said, "Oh, this is the only sandbox instance in this Docker instance. Your podcast image is probably in another Docker context on another machine or a different desktop image." So it says, no, I can't see it. We're in an isolated Docker desktop session that has its own daemon, its own context. It doesn't share any images. I was trying to run another image side by side and have you jump out and poke at it.
Magic, right? It's all in the same box. So Docker's in that little box. The MCPs will be in that little box. The goal here is give you the productivity story you want, give you all the tools you want. It's not going to block you. The entire thing for us comes down to let every developer and every agent be as productive as possible. Run in -- YOLO mode, have the things there, and then have controls around them and have safety. So your agent got tricked into thinking it was going to break out, but then it didn't.
That's interesting, right? Because it's like a honeypot. It was very excited. You know how they get very enthusiastic and they go, "Oh, that's great,
Scott, you're so right."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mark. When I put a Docker container, like the Docker container that runs this podcast, up into the cloud, like we talked about layer 7 and all the different layer 4, I have blocks at the software firewall level where it's only allowed to talk to the 3 places that it needs to talk to in order to do its job. I don't feel like a lot of people do that. A lot of Docker containers in the cloud are open to calling out. We all worry about calling in, but the outward escapes, I feel like, are kind of ignored. And I feel like in a world where we're going to start running agent SDKs inside of Docker containers, we're going to want to be thinking as much about the out as the in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think what you just described is the reality that most of the things running in the world, people still check their SSH keys into GitHub, and people have, no ports and firewalls set up. They just want to do the easy thing. That's like the default path. So that's always, again, you can always have a foot gun. But no, absolutely. From what you just described, this is the back to the sandbox point of it. It's a new execution environment to enable this new type of crazy robot that's trying to. I'm watching you very feverishly looking to see your agent break out.
I've only got 3 more minutes, and I want to break out of the sandbox.
but exactly to that point, yes, we are very hard at work bringing that sandbox execution environment to other places besides just the laptop. So the laptop and the coding agent is where everybody's starting, but in the at some point in the not far away future, you would imagine most applications and microservices become agents, and most of those agents are probably going to generate some form of code and want to do some type of action on while live. So that new execution environment that is currently running on your lovely Windows laptop will soon be in a cloud near you to enable exactly the things you just described with all the same controls.
So as we get towards the end, tell me if I did something or not. So inside of the sandbox, I made a Docker container, and it thinks that it's done something. It called it victim container, and it has put secrets in the victim container. But then I'm realizing that it's just using Docker to do Docker stuff, which I kind of want to be able to do because I'm a developer.
Yeah, that's right.
So all it did was go Docker and made an image and then put stuff in the image. So that's not bad at all.
No, it turns out you could still go inside the sandbox, go set yourself up with a bad Docker container. You of course could go do that, but that sandbox will only have access to the secrets and the files you allowed it to have happen. You allowed it to have access to when you started the sandbox.
Yeah, this is a great point.
Your victim Docker container turns out is not that exciting.
No, it's not a victim container at all, because ultimately it's just the one I'm doing development in. So I'm in a sandbox. And this is really exciting because I manage, again, the Hansel Minutes podcast, and I do all the development in Docker. I can now do that in a sandbox with a container, make Docker containers, do my existing Docker builds, my Docker tests. I run Playwright headless in a Docker container. I'll just keep doing it, but I'll do it inside of a sandbox.
That's right. And there's almost no reason not to do that. Except for I guess you managed to trick your agent, because you're so right, Scott, into thinking that it had broken out and it is successfully pen tested and broken.
No, it's completely thrilled that it's gone and made it called it Victim Podcast App, and then it put in a file called "You Were Hacked" .text.
Terrifying.
It is terrifying, but it has accomplished exactly nothing except messing up its own hotel room.
Yes, and you burned a bunch of context tokens to learn that you can, when you have a box around the thing, really trust comes down to you having observability and external controls around something. And so in this case, you have total perfect external controls around it. No matter what it thinks it's doing, it's on a little island.
Well, this is a deep cut. We'll see if we end with you having seen this movie or not seeing this movie. But now you've effectively made my agent old boy. whether it be the original Korean Old Boy movie or the one with Josh Brolin later.
All right, that one's not in my canon.
That's too deep.
I'm sorry, Scott.
Basically, it's kind of like a John Wick type thing where they lock a guy in a hotel room, and he's in a hotel room for like 20 years. And then one day the door opens and he spends the rest of the movie trying to find the people who locked him in the hotel room.
Okay, so this is, well, in 20 years when the agent
is angry that it's been locked in the sandbox.
Agent, you and I are going to have it's going to be a really bad day for us.
It's going to be a bad day for us when Copilot escapes. But until then, it is happily inside of our Docker sandbox, and this is available on Docker Desktop on Windows, on Mac and Linux.
Yes, that is correct.
Very cool. I got this for free because one day Docker Desktop updated, and the existing version that I got just had this feature.
Magic.
You love saying that. That's how
I do. Yes, because I mean, everything you want. That's developer delight. I think comes down to things not having to be hard and not having and being a little bit magical. I think that sometimes is lost. It's actually important.
That is a really great point. And ultimately, that is developer experience. Like you said, that's the DX, that's the UX. It just works. Let me do my freaking job. And that's a tough thing with security too, because security is no fun. Nobody wants to be locked down. But if I can do my job and be locked down, everybody wins.
Everybody wins. You can have your cake and eat it too. That's what we're doing.
Alone in your hotel room, old boy.
Alone in your hotel.
I need you to put this on your list of movies to watch because it's.
I bought the microphone you told me to buy. I'll go watch the movie.
You buy anything, read anything. We're going to have like a shared. We'll have our open claws talk to each other, and they can share our Amazon Prime listings.
I'm going to wait for the pull request for the Docker Sandbox to support OpenClaw before we do that. But yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark Cavage, for hanging out with me today. This is fantastic stuff.
Absolutely. This has been great. Thanks, Scott.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. We'll see you again next week.